sure. We will see. At least we have a nice percentage of supportive friends here, and just some other people. Friends of yours? No. Lisa's friend. You're Torsten. I'm Nadia. The Russian friend.
Everyone heard of each other, but never met each other.
Yes, we never see us. So Lisa was like, wait. Probably it's a nice thing because the thing will just go quiet and see you can just as well with all the friendly eyes in front.
Probably easier, right?
Yes. This is like a dream fence. All the friends being in the front row, no one else. Hi.
Hereby, good morning, first of all. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Ms. Elizaveta Lavrova will defend her academic thesis entitled Quantitative Neuroimaging with Handcrafted and Deep Radiomics in Neurological Diseases. I would like to invite you to present a summary of your thesis and the conclusion of your thesis in the next 15 minutes, and I'd like to give you the word.
Thank you. Dear Prorector, members of the Corona, colleagues, family, friends, and everyone who has joined online, let me give you a short summary of my PhD dissertation entitled Quantitative Neuroimaging with Handcrafted and Deep Radiomics in Neurological Diseases. So today I would like to speak about the human brain that is in charge for masterpieces we create, technological advances, and also functioning of our body. But unfortunately, as any other organ, it is affected by numerous diseases, and neurological diseases are among leading causes of disability and death, and quite many people already have it, and many are predicted to have it in their lifetime. And the cost for neurological disorders is really high, and it's only growing. So therefore, there is an obvious need for early diagnosis, accurate prognosis, and efficient treatment of neurological diseases. So to do so, of course, we need to have a look into the human skull. Fortunately, thanks to medical imaging, we can do it non-invasively. And the most typical medical images are in neurology are magnetic resonance imaging or MRI, X-ray computed tomography or CT, and positron emission tomography or PET. And they are usually reviewed by the human readers who can accurately answer the questions whether they see pathology on the scan or how large the pathology is, what exactly they see on the scan, and how severe it is. However, there are some questions that are much more difficult to answer based on the images. For example, what is the probability it will develop more, or will the treatment work? And in any case, it is a time-consuming process that requires some expertise from the human readers. But if we have collected quite much data, maybe we can implement data-driven approaches. So if we have many clinical cases and we collected the corresponding data, we can upload that into a computational system and by that get data-driven models. And every time we would get a new clinical case, we would easily get some clinical insight for this patient. So, talking in the language of the data-driven models, in order to answer the question whether there is a pathology, we need to train a detection model. To understand how large it is, we need to train the segmentation model. To understand what exactly we see or will the treatment work, we need to train a classification model. And finally, to understand how severe the disease is or what is the probability it will develop more, we need to train a regression model. And of course, we need to understand how good the models are. And since in my thesis, I'm focused in mostly segmentation and classification tasks, talking about the segmentation in order to assess the performance of the model, typically we implement so-called DICE score that is reflecting how well the predicted contour is overlapped with the ground truth contour. And talking about the classification, to understand how good the model is, we're using sensitivity, that is showing how good the model is capturing the objects that do pose some property. For example, patients, they do have a disease. And specificity, that is showing how good the model is in capturing the objects do not have any property. For example, the healthy controls, they do not.
Just a moment. Is there a technical problem?
My colleague tells me that they don't hear anything.
Okay, technical team upstairs. Can you see me? Hello. There is no sound. Okay, thank you. They are looking at it now. Is it working now? I would say. Yes, so I'm going to speak a little bit, so sorry for you. It's the time, you will get extra time, so don't worry about this. Yes, we can take this. And I'm not sure, if I look to my online 5 members, can you give me a hand if you have a sound? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it like this or is it like this? It's like this with Colette. Okay, I think we can proceed. No, that's okay.
Shall we continue?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I was talking about the performance scores of the data-driven models, and we stopped at the performance scores of the classification model. So yes, specificity is reflecting how good the model is in capturing the objects without some property like healthy controls. And this data-driven approach was already successfully implemented in oncology. One of the methods is called radiomics. So it's based on the following. If we have medical images that do have some segmented contours, we can extract some mathematical descriptors from these images or features. And then we can perform feature selection, engineering, and modeling. And with this, we can get some clinical outcomes. And since the features are explicitly hard-coded by the engineers and the models are also selected by the engineers, this approach is called handcrafted radiomics. However, even here we replace second and third blocks with the deep neural network that would learn the features and the patterns itself. Then the approach would be called deep radiomics. So the question of the thesis is, can we land this methodology from oncology to neurology? And to answer this question, I started with the first project that is a neuro-oncological task, and I studied patients with glioma, which is a brain tumor. And previously it was shown that some genetic mutation that is called 1p19q co-deletion is strongly linked with the positive treatment response. However, to get the co-deletion status, you need to perform the biopsy, which is very invasive, especially in case of the brain. So the question is, what if we capture the medical images of these patients and then link them with the co-deletion status using the radiomics approach? So this was something I tried to do. So I got the MRI data from the glioma patients and I pushed that into radiomics pipeline trying to classify the co-deletion status. And you can see the classification results in here for the internal development dataset and external validation dataset. And even though the sensitivity drops significantly on an external validation dataset, we can conclude that the model was able to capture some patterns and therefore was able to capture the co-deletion status, which is not feasible for the human reader. The next project is devoted to another neurological disease, which is multiple sclerosis, and usually the patients are diagnosed when they already present focal lesions. However, it was shown before that the diffuse changes in the brain appear on the early stages. Unfortunately, the clinical MR sequences are just showing visual contrast, and they are capturing the focal lesions, but they are not sensitive to the diffuse changes. So if we capture quantitative MRI data from these patients, or QMRI, we would be able to retrieve much more information because we would get the maps of the distributions of the physical properties of the human brains. So within this project, I used clinical and quantitative MRI for the radiomics pipeline in order to distinguish between healthy control and multiple sclerosis patients. And you can see the classification results on this slide. T1 weighted is a clinical MRI sequence, and R1 is one of the QMRI maps. And obviously, the classification performance for QMRI is much higher. However, the models, again, were able to capture some patterns, and we link them with the diffuse changes of the brain, which, again, cannot be visible by the human reader. And the next project is devoted to the segmentation, because radiomics pipeline requires the contours, and auto-segmentation can be very beneficial for it. Why did we go for the carotid artery segmentation? Well, it lies in the anatomy of this artery, because it's situated in our neck, and after the bifurcation, the external part goes to the facial muscles, and the internal carotid artery goes to the brain. Therefore, if there are some problems in the carotid artery, then it means that the patient is in high risk of some cerebrovascular events such as stroke. And to have a look into a human neck, we can also use MRI. And since these problems with the carotid artery or plaques are quite heterogeneous, usually we use several MR sequences to have a better description. And therefore, if we want to train a segmentation model, it should be robust on all these black blood sequences at least. So we had the data coming from 4 different centers. 3 of them had the same MR machine and the same protocols. So I took T1 weighted data from these centers and I trained the segmentation model. Then I took the other sequences from these centers for the validation, and I took T1 weighted data from the 4th center also for external validation. And the segmentation approach was the following. So the raw imaging data was pushed into a 3D NNU-net, which is the best performing segmentation model, one of the best. And I took the output of the NNU-net, combined it with the raw MRI, and pushed that into a second segmentation model that was able to produce, with slightly changing the weights of this model, turning on and off, produce the consensus segmentations and uncertainty maps. This I used for the loss function, and with this I got the refined segmentations. And here are the DICE scores for our model and NNU-net, and you can see that even though the scores are very similar, except for our model performs maybe a little bit better on external validation, if you have a closer look at the segmentations, you can see that our model really refined the contours in case of the anatomical abnormalities or image noise. And finally, I would like to mention our open science initiative. So on this slide, again, you see the radiomics pipeline, and many labs can actually implement it in their practice. And there are many open source tools to do so, to implement every step of this. However, there are some gaps. Data curation, image preprocessing, and data exploration, and usually it's done in quite a heterogeneous manner. So therefore, we offered an open source toolbox that is available on GitHub. Also, it's available as a package, and it can close these gaps. And also, the devoted paper is describing the functionality and the vision behind the development of this platform. So to conclude, within my thesis, I have shown that radiomics in neurology is on much earlier stage as compared to oncology. Radiomics has a potential to capture and extract some features that are not visible for the human reader. Deep learning can be beneficial for the radiomics pipeline, providing stable and robust segmentations. And open science initiatives will drive the research and development in this field forward. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention and give the floor back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, and you are well in time. So you even lost some time, but you get some extra time for questioning here by the opponents. For the audience, we have 5 members online, so that's quite a lot. You will see them later on the screen. I can see them already here on the screen, but they will appear here. And we have basically 2 members in the Corona who will be on site. And we have also in the promotion team, which I'm going now to introduce, 2 members will be here live, you can see them, and 2 members are basically online. So, and I would like to introduce them to you here in just in a minute. We have, as first promoter from Maastricht, Professor Lambert. He is online, present, you will see later. We have Professor Phillips, who is here straight in front of me here, And he is from the University of Liège and an expert in medical imaging processes and neuroimaging. We have online Professor Salmon. He is also from Liège in the field of clinical neurology. And we have on site, here right in front of me also, Dr. Woodruff, and he is from Maastricht University with an expertise in machine learning. And by saying this, I would like to welcome all of you, all the members who are coming from outside, from far away, like from Dresden, from Switzerland, and also from Liège. But Liège is basically now this is a double degree, so basically it's close by. We have 5 members in the opposition, so that you noticed, and we're going to start the opposition with Professor Bakkes. And I would like to give, Professor Bakkes was also the chair of the assessment committee. He is affiliated with the Maastricht University, and his expertise is in medical physics. And I would like to give him the word to start the opposition.
The candidate, first of all, a more general methods here, we make compliments. Congratulations for finishing this dissertation. These congratulations are not just for you, but also for your supervisory team from 2 universities. And I should also not forget any beloved one that supported you in this trajectory. The research is novel, and I'm quite sure it faced many challenges, especially if one wants to infer on diverse image data sets as they come from multiple medical imaging centers and where one strives for just one image approach, analysis approach. As a physicist, I like very much the statements in the first half of the thesis, and you showed a little bit about that, about the expectations that quantitative MRI should be a more uniform approach. Let's start with my questions. First, I'd like to go to chapter 4, page 115, table 4.1, and you used multiple data sets on MS, a specialty of the Liège University, which is not a specialty actually here. And you used multiple data sets from different scanning sites, different machines, different protocols, different field strengths, different users, etc. I mean, you must have noticed quality differences between these scans. Can you describe that a little bit? Please be short.
Yes, highly esteemed opponent. Thank you for your kind words and for this question. Indeed, this is very important. So, talking about the QMRI data, it was not very diverse because it came only from the 2 scanners, and the research group working on this data was trying to unify it as much as possible. So therefore, we do believe that the data is quite similar, but of course, it's not in the paper, but when I got this data, I also tried to capture the statistical differences in the features coming from like 2 scanners. So, and I didn't find any statistically significant difference in here. So that's why I decided to proceed. But indeed, if you go further and if you go to the second part of this paper that was especially devoted to external validation on the open source data, so in there, indeed, the image quality was significantly different, and therefore also the performance of the model was much lower. But since we didn't have that many data points, the data harmonization methods were not that good, and the best performance was achieved just with the raw data.
But would you consider it a disadvantage or an advantage that there is a variability in data sets?
I think that it's both. It depends on how much data you have, because when the radiomics as an approach just started, of course, it was a big problem, and it's a big problem still. But if we have a look at the traditional field of artificial intelligence, and if we have a look at what's going on in the field, if we move to the side, the medical imaging problems, then we would see that usually people are trying to capture the data that is as diverse as possible, and then they achieve the great results. So if you have the data that is available, then you would consider it as an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then to the more general part, and you mentioned that in your talk already, I mean, you prefer to use quantitative MRI measures like T1, T2 relaxation time. Why is it? Well, what's the advantage?
For the quantitative MRI. Yeah, because traditional clinical MR data is expressed in arbitrary units, and therefore it only represents the visual contrast. And I think that using the quantitative images is beneficial for both human readers, but also for the machine-based approach, especially for the machine-based approach. Because I guess that when it's for the human readers, then it's just the more unified way of putting the windows, the intensity windows, when they are reviewing the image, and then they are getting more uniform results when they see different scans coming from the different machines. And talking about the AI, of course, for the machine, it's much easier to deal with the things that are already measured quantitatively, and then it can bring some conclusions based on exact numbers.
Mm-hmm. Well, in MRI, we always say there's nothing for free. And I can imagine there is an advantage of using quantitative values. I mean, they are less variable among sites, among different scanners, etc. But there are always disadvantages. Can you imagine one?
Yes, I can imagine this indeed, because even for the QMRI sequences right now, because it's also, those are the sequences that are mostly used for the research, and then every research group goes with their ways of reconstruct these QMRI maps, and they are going with their QMRI maps. But still they are trying at least to describe that they are representing some particular property. And if at the level of this verbal description, or biologically connected description, or physically connected description, we can have some sort of standardization or unification. So for example, if it's a proton density, then you can measure it differently, but still, since it's a measurement, and if it's an approved measurement, then it should be the proton density.
Mm-hmm. Any idea why radiologists that describe images visually, why they don't use it?
Sorry, can you please?
Why radiologists that visually score or describe these images, why they don't use it? Any idea for that?
Why the clinicians don't use the quantitative MRI?
Yeah.
Well, because they are quite all right with the clinical sequences, because of course if you're using the conventional clinical sequence, then you have the advantage of the time, the acquisition time. So if you're good enough, if you already have all the anatomical structures and you see the pathologies that you want to see, then you don't need to go further, you just need to help patients.
Mm-hmm. Well, it takes a lot of time extra, that's right. But it's also, I mean, if you look at disease, multiple sclerosis lesions, I mean, it's not one physiological or physical quantity that describes it. You need multiple of them. And moreover, I mean, quantitative images, to look at just one of these images, they are less sensitive than the weighted images in general. Chapter 4 is also about detecting field diffusive abnormalities, in contrast to focal abnormalities you described. And you put a hypothesis on that. What motivated that hypothesis? That quantitative MRI would be more sensitive to that?
Well, because the sequences that are used in clinical practice, they are not sensitive to some tiny small abnormalities in the brain. They just don't have enough contrast. And we thought that if there are some quantitative ways to capture the images of the brain, then maybe there are some numbers to which the human eye is just not sensitive enough, because we cannot really distinguish many shades of gray, because we have some certain intensity resolution as humans as well. And if the measurements are accurate and if the quantitative maps are accurate, then these changes in intensities, they do represent something, and then they would be informative for our approach. So this was the origin of the hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, my last one, thank you. You used multiple contrasts in MRI. To use more contrast, you have more data, it gives you more chances to find something. But you could also think about, did you miss something? If you could redo it again and you would have a wish, would there be any contrast? Could you motivate any other contrast you didn't use? Why would you like to have it?
Yes, indeed. I would wish to have more contrasts because indeed in this study we used T1 weighted sequence which just shows the anatomy, but it's not really used in clinical practice among the clinicians. We know that those are T2 weighted or FLAIR data, so I would really wish to go for FLAIR data. Unfortunately, we didn't have it available, so therefore we just gave our shot with T1 weighted data.
Yes.
But yeah, I would go for FLAIR.
Yes, but I guess you use the T1 because it's widely available.
Yes, and to be honest, to reconstruct this QMRI, you acquire different sequences and you acquire different echoes, and we just took T1 weighted first echo data.
Yes, and it's also that the FLAIR image is very sensitive to MS lesions. It's quite competitive to the MT sequence, but unfortunately it's not quantitative. Always something in the plus and something in the minus arena. Thank you very much. I give the word back to the chairman.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. van Soest. He was also a member of your assessment committee. He is affiliated with Maastricht University and works in the field of data science and medical informatics. And he is also today my secretary. And I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, Mr. Pro-Rector. First of all, I also want to congratulate you on this thesis. It's and also the supervisory team from both universities. It's interesting work on many different levels, I would say, both on the more clinical level, but also on a technical level, but also on the software side of it. And there I want to start on, in terms of questions in chapter 5, where you're talking about the segmentation, or have done studies on segmentation or auto-segmentation, where you included the term ground truth. But how should we interpret ground truth in segmentation? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, esteemed opponent, thank you for a nice compliment and for this question. Indeed, it's a crucial one in this field. So ground truth term stands for something that we take as a true contour. So as something we should refer to or something we should approach to when we're developing our pipeline. But indeed, even in segmentation task, that is quite obvious, because if you perform the segmentation, you can see the image, you can see the results, and then by your eye you can just compare, right? You can compare whether it's a right segmentation or wrong. And still, human reader, or not human reader, but just like the source of the ground truth segmentation can provide some errors simply because some parts of the pathology or anatomy are not visible. But yeah, in this case, the ground truth were the labels that were acquired from the human readers that do have training in carotid imaging.
Right, and was it one observer or were there multiple? And is there variability in there? And yeah, what does it mean for that ground truth?
Indeed, the data set was large because it was a clinical study in the Netherlands, and it's just physically not feasible to provide the segmentations only by the one human reader. To be honest, I don't know the amount of the actual human readers that provided segmentations. However, there was a benchmark from this data set, I think for around 20-30 patients. And then the human reader was allowed to perform segmentations on the rest of the data set if he could provide the segmentations on this benchmark that were in concordance with the baseline ground truth segmentations for the benchmark.
Right. So there's one person who segmented it, but there are multiple different persons in that whole data set who did that segmentation job, right? So then it's interesting that you get to a die score of 90% sometimes in these numbers. But in the discussion, you also mentioned, I think it was page 206, that you say, well, a die score or other, let's say, more technical metrics are not the most relevant ones. So I was wondering, why would you use them then in this chapter, or what would you use in otherwise?
Well, on this project, we worked in a really multidisciplinary team, but in the end, we needed to provide the segmentations and we needed to provide the tool for the clinicians who do work with the patients. And for example, for me as an engineer or a data scientist, the DICE score is always an important score, even though sometimes you want to refine your segmentations and then go to some scores that are more related, like, I don't know, center-line DICE to understand the direction, or some scores that are related just to the surface of the segmented area. So for me, it's just it's important to understand how good the contours are aligned. But for the clinicians, sometimes like one voxel in one direction, it's not that important because for them, the clinically relevant measurements are important. So for them, in the end, indeed, on this particular task, the volumes were important because they did contain the clinically relevant information because they provided the treatment based on the volumes. So therefore, I gave some scores for data scientists in there and some scores for the clinicians. And of course, I wanted to correspond to the human readers. That's why I also provided the ICC. Because, well, at this point, I didn't believe that our segmentations in the clinical sense would overperform the human readers.
Right. So basically, there are scores on many different levels, but the far most ultimate thing, if you would apply such a auto segmentation tool in practice, right? What would that score be? Would it be the quality of the contour? Would it be a DICE score, or would it even be time to segment or correct segmentations?
It really depends on the use case, I think, because if we're really going to the clinical implementation and to the AI tools for the hospital that we are going to land there tomorrow, then I would say that we cannot go only for the one score. So indeed, we need something that quantifies how well the contour is aligned with the current gold standard, and then we need some scores that are somehow connected to the clinical outcomes. So mostly these outcomes are volumes. Even in oncology, it should be volume, right? Because the basic thing that you assess in the tumor is volume. So that's why right now I would go to the volumetric scores, but we always need to think about the target clinical function that is to be performed at the hospital.
Right. And maybe the last question about this chapter mostly is, in the introduction is also mentioned an ISO standard, which is about the trustworthiness of AI. And of course, if you want to rely on such an auto segmentation, in that respect, what would be the most important metric to assess in a clinic, for example, whether you trust an AI? Is that indeed the quality aspect of the contour? Is that and the volume aspect? Is that the DICE score, or would it be this timing, according to you?
I think that I would go in the direction of the stability, because I think that in this case, if we want to certify the corresponding product, we need to show the contours are stable, no matter which machine we're using and no matter which site we're going to. So if it's possible to have some sort of test retest on different machines, it would be great. But otherwise, just to show that the performance scores are more or less the same or uniform if we calculate to obtain them on the data that comes from different sources.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Then I want to move to chapter 6, the software package which was developed. And I was wondering, in that chapter there are also many competitive tools mentioned, or tools which can do parts of it, right? And I was wondering, when reading the article, how can I assess whether this tool will help me?
Well, first of all, I think that you need to think about the target audience for this tool. So we were thinking about the people from non-programming background that would like to implement the radiomics pipeline. And then you would need to assess it, to assess its usability on this cohort of users. We did not aim to create a tool that would build the models themselves, because there are quite already so many tools for modeling, and we still believe that the model itself and the machine learning approach should be a choice of the engineer, of the developer, or of this non-programming person who has some brilliant idea in the mind. But we just aimed to give a little bit of connection between the main steps, because usually for the radiomic pipeline, some crucial steps, they are well described, and there are some tools, but then there is something miniature, something in between, and usually people don't think about it. For example, the exploratory data analysis is so important, but we don't see many papers because by default we do it, but the results are so miniature to put them in our paper. That's why we just silently do it and then continue with the research.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Then I'll give back the word to the pro-rector.
Thank you very much. We indeed have to proceed. We have 3 more opponents to go. And I would like to welcome Professor Colette. She was also a member of your assessment committee. She is affiliated with the University of Liège in the Department of Aging, and her specialty is in neuroscience and neurodegenerative diseases. And I would like to welcome her online. And I would like to ask the team to put Professor Colette on the screen, because this is Professor Deliberation. Professor Colette, I would like to give you the word.
Yeah. Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Mr. Prorector. First, I want to thank the candidate and the promoter for inviting me to read the thesis. It was a really interesting and high quality works, and I learned a lot of things about machine learning. So I'm really happy with what you have done, Elizaveta. But as you know, I am not a specialist in machine learning, so my question will be probably really general. So, okay. And my first question is about my understanding on what we can really do with machine learning. You indicate in your thesis that deep learning utilizes a feature created by the artificial neural network during the model training process. And in fact, does this mean that the feature have to be totally created by the artificial network, or that we can enter some input in the phenomenon at study, because we know a priori that this information is useful and can be help the training process? So in other words, can we add something else that the data from the neuromics in the training process?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your nice feedback and for this question. So indeed, it's always possible to add something into a training process, and this is something that is already done in the world, especially in the last 2 years, with the approach of the multi-modal models, the generative AI models. So I think that this is the right direction to go, and this is a proper direction to go, simply because when the patient is at the hospital, you cannot diagnose the patient only based on the scans. You need to have the full picture. You need to have the clinical records for this patient. And therefore, I believe that if we want to continue with this deep learning approach, we just need to push more in the direction of the multimodal models. So yes, in this case, of course, like those were exploratory studies, so we wanted to know how good the images are by themselves, but we could add also the clinical scores from the patients as well. It's just that indeed the data sets were not that large, and we were scared to have some sort of an overfitting.
Okay, so in that case, we have to select in collaboration with the clinician what other information will be entered in the model. I suppose it will change from one pathology to another.
Right, but it also depends, I think, at which time point of the technological development we are. Because right now, I think that the domain knowledge is something that we really need to preserve and we need to consider while building the models. So we simply cannot go forward without clinicians and their inputs and opinions. However, I believe that if we develop really large models and we have really much data, and if we also are able to process this amount of data, and we are approaching this, but we're not there yet. So in this case, I believe that also we can try to use machine learning, deep learning, to estimate which exactly scores are relevant and which are the most informative.
Okay, thanks. That's really exciting. Still in relationship with pathology, in your chapter 4 on multiple sclerosis, you report you did not observe correlation between radiomics feature and age, and so you conclude that radiomics could provide additional information than the one related to that variable, so the age variable. I was a little confused by this sentence because age is not a main determinant of multiple sclerosis. There is other clinical measures that are more relevant to characterize multiple sclerosis. And so, in that case, do you expect to observe correlation with such measurements, so measures that are associated to the disease, for example, a cognitive impairment of the disability score, the DSS score? And again, but you have in part responded to my question previously. In the future, will you consider to enter some such information in the machine learning models?
Yes, it would be great to incorporate a DSS first of all, of course. As I said, on this data set, we didn't have much data, and as far as I remember, the EDSS score, the EDSS was rather unified in this data set, so it was just not like very informative. But the main problem in there was that the data set was really small, and for this amount of the patients, if we add also EDSS that completely describes the condition of the patient, then we would have no job for the machine learning model. So that's why we completely decided not to mention it. But of course, if we have bigger data sets, and also what is the most important, if we have more representative data set, which means that we have patients of completely different stages of multiple sclerosis, then it would be great, it would be very interesting. But in here we had, I think, only relapsing, remitting, and progressive patients. I would like to have more representative data for this first.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Okay, and I have a question that was in part related to the first question of your first opponent. Again, it's related to clinical application. How you discussed previously, your data are from different scanners, but it's mainly a scanner dedicated to research, and your patient group was already selected in regards to research. So you have a relatively homogeneous set of data, both regarding to imaging variable and also to patient variable. So my question is, do you consider that you will obtain so nice result and that your approach will be really useful in a totally clinical context? For example, when it will be scanner from the hospital, generally 1.5T scanner that will be used, so you will not have the same SNR resolution, contrast in tissue, you will have probably more artifact and so on. So how this can impact the precision, the usefulness of the radiomics, and from the patient side, what if there is other brain characteristic related to the patients that are not from the pathology? For example, I am thinking of older participants that have multiple sclerosis. Probably this participant also have change in the brain that are related to the pathological to the aging process per se, but not to the multiple sclerosis. So in a more noisy context, how did you consider that did you consider that your approach is still so reliable, so valuable? So it's
I think that multiple sclerosis patients would greatly benefit if we would be able to bring the QMRI into clinical practice, even though much job has to be done, like starting from the standardization of the protocols coming from different machines and vendors, and like discussion in the field, discussion among the clinicians, because then the clinical guidelines should be reviewed. But if it would be possible, it would be great, because indeed QMRI, it's not just characterizing quantitatively the brain tissues, it's also sensitive to to tiny impairments or changes, morphological changes in the brain, as it was shown by my colleagues who actually provided this data set. So it was the paper of Lemaire, published in 2019. Yes, I think that patients would be beneficial from this. And talking about the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I've lost it a little bit.
Yeah, it's about the fact that patients that I see in clinic have often several diseases. For example, you can have a patient with multiple sclerosis, but that also, I don't know, had before a minor head injury that have a repercussion on brain activity.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you.
Patient, yeah.
I have to interrupt you because your time are way over, and we have to proceed with the other opponents. I'm sorry, and I would like to proceed with Professor Deliberation, and he was also a member of your assessment committee. I also would like to thank him that he joins today all the way from online from Switzerland, from Sierra, I understand, and he's affiliated with the University of Applied Sciences Western Switzerland in the basic field of informatics, and I'd like to give him the word, Professor Deliberation.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this assessment. I would like also to congratulate the candidate for the excellent work. It was very interesting to read with really solid research with many aspects that were really well thought and really impressive output, both in terms of software and publications. So I will proceed with my first question. So my first question is kind of general between chapter 3 and 4. And so it's a radiomics specific one, I would say. And so basically, when you do radiomics with oncological disease, the region of interest is quite defined by the gross tumor volume. So it's very kind of well located, and you don't expect a lot of diversity inside this region of interest. When you move to non-oncological disease, there is an interesting opportunity to maybe use a larger region of interest, which you actually do in chapter 4 for multiple sclerosis, because you use, for instance, entire white matter. That's very interesting. But I think it also comes with some challenges, in particular coming from the fact that some information might get just drawn in the other signal, because imagine if maybe what's useful to detect MS is to find lesions. Maybe these lesions is just 1% of this region of interest. So maybe the signal will get drawn in there. So my question is, how much do you think it is a current problem or limitation in your research in this chapter 4? And what could you do maybe to address that specifically, both first in the context of handcrafted radiomics, and then how that applies when you use deep radiomics?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your nice words and for this question. So I believe that indeed in neurology it's very important, because in neurology you have multiple regions, potential regions of interest. And first of all, I believe that you need to use some sort of a domain knowledge to understand which exactly area should be examined the first. So you need to look at the clinical guidelines to understand where the clinicians are looking at, or just ask the clinicians and test these regions first. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, if you have a look at the papers that were published, then a huge diversity of the gray matter regions are analyzed, simply because it's getting dystrophic, and then you can get some information in there. So therefore, again, at this point, I would go for this approach. I would go for the clinical recommendations and would have a look at these areas first, because by radiomics, you can just sort of automate the pipeline of the diagnosis. So if you have a scan, you upload it to the system, and then at least system says that, hey, there is something suspicious in this part of the brain, in this nuclei, for example. But going further, if you really have large data sets, then it's worth testing other regions of interest as well, because then you might detect some sort of early disease development biomarkers. But in this case, you need to be really careful, because you need to test your approach for this false discovery, because it might be a false discovery, and then you need to have a link with the biology. So again, you need to go back to the hospital, and when you have a strong link to the biology, to the medical condition of the patient, you can prove it indeed, then you can go further with this discovery approach.
Okay, yeah, thank you. But then how do you think that deep radiomics will deal better with this potential problem of having large regions of interest? Or?
I believe that yes, it has a great potential because, for example, if you upload, if you use the MRI data or just any other medical imaging data for the deep neural networks, just a simple encoder, for example, like the downstream chain. And then in this case, you can also visualize the activation maps or saliency maps, especially saliency maps. And in this situation, you will have a look at which exactly region the model is looking at and which exactly region is informative for the model. And then you get the outcome, but also you get some sort of an interpretability, just understanding whether the model looks at the real pattern or the false pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. So I think also that deep models will deal better with that, because also the kind of spatial aggregation is happening with like max pooling or attention mechanism allows to kind of find of the signal inside large regions. Great, thanks a lot. So I'll move to my second question, so which is on the segmentation chapter, so chapter 5. So very interesting work overall with this innovative approach to use this uncertainty loss to help the network focus on where the parts are less easy to segment. And so my question is, so when we look at segmentation uncertainty at a voxel level, it's pretty clear that this will happen at the boundary of the object, because that's where you don't really know if the voxel is part of the object or not. And I think this is also happening in your case if you will look at this kind of uncertainty maps. And so my question is that how does this compare or complement to more boundary-based loss? Like there are now several losses that are proposed for boundary, to focus really on the boundary when compared to dice loss, for instance, that focus really on more the integral over the regions. So do you think it's complementary to this boundary loss, or how would that compare?
Well, actually, we did compare this approach with the implementation of the boundary loss. Maybe we did not, honestly speaking, we did not weight the boundary loss and the general dice loss correctly, because we did not really get the good results. But our approach does not offer you only the uncertainty estimation at the boundaries of the vessels or in the problematic areas, because also it localizes like the general location of the vessel. And if you just use the boundary loss that is not connected to the previous model, so not part of the like this sort of a boosting pipeline, in this situation you might have some false positive discoveries within the neck that are situated far from the carotid artery. Also, challenging part for us was that we wanted to follow the internal branch. And using the boundary-related losses, it led us sometimes to the external branch due to the complexity of the anatomy.
Excellent, very good. Thanks very much for this answer. And I will stop here and give the floor back to the rectors.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Zwanenberg. He is affiliated with the department of the National Center for Tumor Diseases in Dresden. And I would like to also thank him that he joins this morning online, and I'd like to give him the word.
Yes, thank you. First of all, congratulations on writing a very nice thesis, your good presentation here. I have a few questions. The first one is very general. So you performed multiple studies where you had to process MRI data, and as you have indicated in your thesis and also discussed in the questions here, one of the issues with MR data in general, clinical MR data especially, is that they are not really quantitative. So you used various methods to make them more harmonized. I think one question in the field is, so what kind of methods are really useful, really generalizable to different kinds of MR images? So I would like to ask ask whether you have gained some insight into this aspect.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliment and this question. So indeed, I think that it's one of the most important parts of the field, especially when the field just started. And I think that we can tackle this problem from two directions. So one of them indeed is related to the harmonization of the data itself, and another one could be in development of the more robust, especially deep learning methods. So talking about the harmonization methods themselves, you can perform them at different levels. So you can perform the harmonization of the images themselves. So you can standardize the image acquisition protocols, for example, and then your images would be more or less the same, and it's the easiest thing. Or do some sort of fandom studies in order to find which features are stable. But also you can perform image preprocessing, something that is related to intensities normalization. In brain case, it's also bias field correction, histogram normalization as well. So yes, but then you can also move to the field of the features normalization, so features themselves. So if you know what is the source of the bias, then you can perform the statistical unification or harmonization of the features. But in here you also need to be really careful, because you need to still to preserve the diagnostic or informative or biological information in this case. So using something like combat, but you need to be careful that, okay, my bias source is hospital or is the scanner. And talking about the other direction is something that is related to the deep learning approaches. So right now people really are using large data sets with the heterogeneous data. It helps a lot, but also the recent papers have shown that the proper data augmentation helps a lot, because if the model has seen really diverse data, then it can more or less perform on this data, diverse data. And domain adaptation, of course.
Mm-hmm. So among the methods that you used, what would you recommend?
I think that it really depends on the project. So again, we should start with how much data is available. So if not a lot, then we would go to the image. Me, myself, I would go to the image harmonization methods first, because just from my experience, I found them more stable, and you really perform changes on the image level, and also it's quite visual for you if you did something wrong. So if you performed some sort of normalization and then something went wrong, then you can just visualize these images and you see that it's not correct. And if you're doing it on a feature level, yes, you can still visualize it, but then you look at the distribution and sometimes you don't really have an idea whether it's a correct change of the distribution or there was something wrong in there.
So then I have a question related to chapter 2. There you looked into ways or models to explain whether certain genetic change has occurred. And you find certain features from T1, T2 weighted images. Do you have an interpretation for these features? So a visual interpretation?
Well, of course, in this case, I would have some expectations that the features should be related to the texture. But talking about the sequences itself, I believe that they are just complementary in this case, and they are capturing more or less the same information in the tumor. But the most important thing that if there are some changes that could be linked to the codeletion status, they should be hidden in the heterogeneity of the tumor.
Okay. So these features are related to tumor heterogeneity and visible in the image. Okay, good. Good, then maybe go to chapter 7. Let's zoom out a little bit. So you discussed their foundation models, which is a big new thing, which already exists for several years. But right now we have the first literal foundation models for medical imaging. Can you maybe explain to me and the audience what these models are and how we are supposed to use them?
So indeed, foundation models exist for quite some years already, but I think that they got viral just right after all the AI field got viral when it went to the consumers. So like with the expansion of ChatGPT and etc. So in medical field, the foundation models can be very beneficial because I feel that the way they are trained and the way they are solving the task, it is a little bit the way that is similar to how the clinicians develop their knowledge. Because the idea in here is that first you pre-train the model in an unsupervised manner so that you learn some sort of representations of your data points. And then you have a so-called downstream task. So you have a target clinical task you need to solve for this particular data, for this particular hospital. And then you just fine-tune the model for this downstream task, and then you're able to predict the survival rate for the patient, or to understand the grade of the tumor, or to understand even the site where exactly the scan came from. So I believe that if we have much data and then we learn much of representations, then we can use this sort of data for not just one diagnosis, but like differential diagnosis, but like for the global multi-diagnostic tasks.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I would like to return the word to the chair.
There is, if you want, room for one more question, if you like.
Okay. Okay. A very short one. So in chapter 6, you provide a pipeline which relies on radiomics. This may not be the ideal choice for the future because it doesn't seem to support modern Python versions like 3.9, 3.10 onwards. Doesn't work that well with Mac OS and is not really compliant with international established reference standards. Is it easy to switch out like the radiomics engine from the package and insert a new one?
Absolutely, because the idea, the architecture of the software was created in a very modular way, so that if you want to work with the data from different sources, you can just turn in another source of the features.
You are allowed to finish your answer, but you don't have to. That's the law here. So it's your decision.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'll just shortly say that, yeah, you can just plug in any omics approach into the pipeline, and the pipeline will work with that.
Very good. Thank you very much. Dear Ms. Lavrova, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss not so much the quality of your thesis that has been approved, but particularly the way you have defended your thesis this morning. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return to the aula. Thank you very much.
All right, please.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if there's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. The line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die.
On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off.
The mileage, traveling so far from home, gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Dear Ms. Lavrova, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and particularly the way you have defended your thesis this morning. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you officially the degree of doctor. Congratulations. Professor Lambert is authorized to confer you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university customs, and I invite later Professor Lambert and also later Professor Philips now to take the floor, and I give the first word to Professor Lambert.
All right, please.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Elizaveta Lavrova, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, Dr. Woodruff will present you with the degree certificate signed by the rectors, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
And I give the word now to Professor Philips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the official statement from the University of Liège, and it's one of the only constraints that we have in terms of PhD defense. It has to be stated in French, so please bear with me. Vu le décret du 7 novembre 2013 définissant le paysage de l'enseignement supérieur et l'organisation académique des études, nous, présidents, secrétaires et membres du jury chargé de conférer le grade académique concerné, déclarons que Madame Elizaveta Lavrova obtient en l'année académique 2023-2024 le grade académique de docteur en sciences de l'ingénieur et technologie après avoir défendu publiquement une thèse intitulée Quantitative neuroimaging with handcrafted and deep radiomics in neurological disease. En foi de quoi, nous lui délivrons le présent diplôme, attestant en même temps que les prescriptions légales relatives aux conditions d'accès au programme, à la durée des études et à la publicité des examens ont été observées. Oh. So here is your fee.
Exactly, that's the way it should be. You can move forward if you want.
That's you. It's yours.
And the co-promoter.
And the
All there.
You want to see on
And
the other side.
And the promoters on the screen. Yes? Okay, then I'm going to give the word to Dr. Woodruff, who is going to speak the laudatio.
Okay, thank you for the word. So, esteemed members of the committee, dear colleagues, dear family of the candidates, and of course, well, no longer candidate anymore, Dr. Liza Lavrova, I can say that now. Well, we're here to celebrate not only the end of an academic trip, a long road full of ups and downs and curves and absent advisors and corona and double degrees, but also to celebrate the person who actually journeyed this road with a lot of resilience and perseverance, and that's, of course, Liza standing here. From the very beginning, Liza was quite a unique candidate, right? Not only was she, for me, the first double degree PhD candidate, but she also had work experience when she started with us, and she rode her horse all the way from Moscow to Maastricht. Okay, that last part was not true, but never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'm sure this is how it will be told in the future. But she did transport her whole horse from Moscow to around here to have it close to her, which is quite unique, I would say, amongst the PhD students that I have met so far. After that start in a new department with freshly painted walls, she actually found her place very quickly, made friends with all the other PhD students, and was very quickly part of our team. And as I mentioned, there were moments of resilience, and that's why I like the riding the horse story a little bit, because it kind of is, riding a horse from Moscow to here was very similar to this whole PhD journey. I'm sure Lisa saw it as something that was worthwhile, but in the end, quite a arduous journey. Not only due to bureaucratic hiccups, especially in the last year, being positioned in Germany, in France, but also having to deal with advisors in Liège and in Maastricht, and new PhD regulations. Everything happened to make the journey even more difficult for you, but yet you persisted, and here you stand. A few things that happened along the way, a few mishaps that happened to Lisa, for example. During Corona, she had issues with her landlord, and she had to move houses. And that was when nobody was allowed to move, and then nothing was available. That was quite traumatic for a while. But again, Lisa managed, and every new Zoom meeting we would have, she'd be in a nicer apartment with, at some point, even with view to French mountains in the background. So that was quite nice. During her PhD, and I know not exactly when this happened, Lisa found a love for the mountains and started doing things around mountains, such as climbing steep slopes, but also going down the more gentle slopes. And I really hope that this is also how your career will progress, that the very steep ascent is now over, you've reached what you wanted to do, and that the rest is not in the sense that the quality will go down, but that it will be more enjoyable skiing down the slopes that you have reached. And so, yeah, here we stand today to honor your resilience. And I have to say also your academic integrity that you've always shown, and also your love for open source software, for making sure that things are available to everybody. So congratulations on this very momentous day.
So, dear Dr. Lavrova, how does that feel? Feels good?
Good enough.
So I think we can see now that we see what we call a version Lavrova 2.0. Is that correct? So the new version. Very good. Thank you. I would like to congratulate you on behalf of Maastricht University. You did a splendid job. You did really answer the questions very well, and also all the members of the Corona mentioned already the way that they appreciate the way you have answered these questions. So that's a compliment to you. In my compliments, I also would like to address the promotion team, the two available here on site and the two online, and I think they guided you over the last 4 or 5 years. I understand you finished already in January 2023. That's quite a long time ago. And then you moved to Munich, I noticed, and then from Munich to some other startup companies which are not named for some reasons, I'm not sure, but they're not named. So congratulations. I would also like to thank the members of the Corona, both the ones who are online as the ones who are on site, who could join. Thank you for joining here. It's important that we have you here and that you addressed all these questions. My compliments also go to your family and friends here in the first line. Thank you that you joined. It's an important day for the new young doctor. It's a day which she will remember. And I also would like to look a little bit further in the distance. I can see there are quite some Indian and Chinese PhD students, and I'm looking forward to see them as pro-rector to present their thesis in the not so near future, I hope. Yes, thank you very much. By saying this, I think we're going to conclude. There's one thing I would like to mention. Professor Lambert is interested to also sign your bill. He is not here, but I'm not sure when you are leaving to somewhere, I think in France, I suppose. No?
Munich.
To Munich. You have to discuss with him because he likes to sign, but he will be back Monday or Tuesday. And so we can then decide that you leave your bill here and it will be sent to you in Munich if you're not staying here. Saying this, I think we're all ready for some drinks, some coffee, some tea or some juice. And I would like to close this session. And for closing this session, I use my hammer, which you haven't seen, but it's right here. I close the session and I thank you very much and we join you. How do we proceed? You and the people, you all can go already to the room where we have the ceremony, the so-called rafter. You can start already drinking and enjoying and eating something. We will stay here for a moment and we make a picture with 5 members online on the screen together with a new doctor. And I would like to ask that one photographer stays here to make the picture. You will make the picture. Okay, thank you very much. And that's it.
All right.
And shifting.